Essentially, every offer to buy a home written in Maryland and DC will be the same as far as the paperwork that's involved. But there are a handful of crucial elements that will set each offer apart from one another. It's extremely important for both buyers and sellers to understand what these elements are, how they may differ from offer to offer, and what the impact of these terms may be on the process. I'm Peter Boscas with Red Cedar Real Estate, and in this mini-series, we'll dive deep into each of these variables, explaining what options buyers and sellers may have. For buyers, we'll explain how to structure an offer to be as aggressive as possible while still providing protections. And for sellers, we'll detail how the buyer's offer terms may positively or negatively impact the bottom line, as well as how to use this information to decide which offer to accept. Coincidentally, most of these contract elements can be broken up into 3 tiers from least to most aggressive. And we like to call these the good, better, best options, or GBB. Today we're going to kick the series off with home inspections, GBB edition. In an equal market where there are roughly the same number of buyers and sellers, the most common inspection process would be what I call the traditional or standard inspection process. In the traditional inspection process, the buyer would conduct a series of various inspections of the subject property. Most commonly, this would include the structural and mechanical inspection, which is the typical inspection you might be thinking of. This would be where a general home inspector looks at the major mechanical systems of the house, like the heating and air conditioning systems, the plumbing, electrical components of the house, the roof, the foundation, and so on. It's also very common for buyers to conduct a test for radon gas and a wood-destroying insect inspection, which would be looking for evidence of things like termites and carpenter bees. Depending on the house and lot, there may be some additional inspections completed as well. For instance, if a property has well water or a septic system, those systems would be inspected for proper operation and safety. And there are a host of other inspections available as well for things like mold, lead paint, chimney inspection. The list goes on. A knowledgeable agent will work with a buyer to determine which inspections may be appropriate for a particular property. During the traditional home inspection process in most of Maryland, once these inspections have been completed, the buyers would have the opportunity to request repairs from the seller based on their findings. This starts a second round of negotiations in the home buying process. For instance, the inspections may have uncovered a list of 10 issues with the home, and then the buyer may decide to request 7 of them be repaired by the seller before settlement. Once the request is made, the seller may make a counter proposal and offer to repair, let's say, 5 of those items. At this point, when the seller has made their counter proposal, the buyer can either decide to accept that proposal and move forward with the purchase, or the buyer can decide to cancel the contract and walk away from the sale with no penalty. Basically, the way this process is structured, the buyer is fully protected and simply cannot be forced to buy the home if they aren't comfortable with either the condition of the property or the seller's offer of how they propose to rectify any issues. In some areas like Montgomery County and DC, the process is a bit different and it's more flexible in that the buyer and the seller can continue to go back and forth negotiating repairs until they come to a final agreement that both sides are happy with, which is a little different than the original version where there's only one round of negotiations. The traditional inspection process is the least aggressive option available for buyers to include in their offer because there's a high level of uncertainty to the seller as to how much they may need to spend on repairs later in the process. The opposite or most aggressive inspection option would be no inspections at all. And that option is exactly what it sounds like. The buyer will not conduct any inspections of the property at all and would have no right to request repairs or to cancel the contract. This is the most attractive option to a home seller, but obviously this is a very risky proposition for the buyer, as there could be all manner of issues with the property hiding just under the surface that a buyer would not know about until after buying the house and settling in. At Red Cedar, we never advocate for buyers to buy a home without any type of inspection. As with the other contract variables we'll be discussing in the GBB series, there is a middle ground inspection option that's more aggressive than the traditional process that would be more attractive to sellers but would still also offer protection to the buyers. This option is known as an as-is inspection. The name is a little misleading. Most people tend to think that this means you're buying the house as is without having the opportunity to inspect the home. Actually, with an as-is inspection, the buyer can still have the house inspected as thoroughly as they want, including any of the dozen or so different inspection types we talked about earlier. The difference with this option is that once the inspections have been completed and the buyer has the findings from the various inspectors, the buyer does not have the option of asking for repairs from the seller. The buyer is still protected with this process though, in that the buyer can decide to cancel the contract after the inspections are completed and they can walk away from the purchase with no penalty. In this situation, the buyer doesn't have to tell the seller why they're canceling the purchase, simply that they no longer want the house. So the buyer could cancel the sale for something catastrophic with the house, or it could be something minor. As a seller, the benefit to the as-is inspection option is that the buyer won't be asking for a lot of small, nitpicky repairs. For instance, I was representing a seller of a very well-maintained home, and we received a request from a buyer to have a licensed plumber repair a loose toilet seat and a licensed electrician to replace a 50-cent plastic wall switch plate. Sometimes with the traditional home inspection process, these minor repairs or maintenance issues can derail a purchase if the buyer's agent hasn't done an adequate job of setting expectations and explaining what types of repairs are reasonable to request. However, there is a downside risk for sellers accepting an as-is inspection that most agents don't explain to their clients. Because the buyer can terminate the contract for any reason whatsoever during the inspection period, the seller won't have the opportunity to offer repairs or credit to make the buyer happy and keep the sale together. That means a buyer who may have been satisfied with a $1,000 credit towards fixing a relatively minor issue may instead decide to cancel the sale and walk away. And that may end up costing the seller a lot more in the long run, as the property may now have a stigma against it if other buyers see the house was under contract but it's now back on the market. We'll discuss how a property coming back on the market can cost sellers big money in a future episode. So if you're interested, make sure you turn on your notifications and hit like and subscribe so you'll be notified when that episode comes out. Because of this, there's actually a trend by some listing agents to request buyers use the traditional home inspection process instead of the as-is process, just so there can be some conversation later if the buyer finds some concerning issue during the inspections instead of just canceling the sale. Now, even though there seems to be a very definitive line between the three levels of inspection aggressiveness or protections, there are some crafty and possibly unethical ways buyers can make their offer look more aggressive than they really are, and sellers should be aware of that. One of the sneakier tactics in the current market is that some buyers are writing offers with no inspection protection and saying they're only going to have a home inspection done for informational purposes only. This means they're indicating the buyer won't have the right to negotiate repairs or cancel the sale based on the inspection results. And again, this is the most aggressive option we talked about earlier. However, there is another contingency in Maryland where the seller has to provide the homeowner association documents to the buyer if the home is located in an HOA. Once these documents have been received, the buyer can cancel the sale up to 5 days later without any reason given and no penalty to the buyer. So what these slick buyers are doing is they're claiming their offer is not contingent on a home inspection. But if something turns up during the home inspection that they don't like, they'll cancel the sale but claim it was because of the HOA docs. And this is technically allowable and the seller would have no recourse in this situation. This is important because if the seller is deciding between two offers and one is claiming their offer is not contingent on the home inspection, but they're still asking for one anyway, the seller may as well consider that offer as if it was an as-is inspection. A good seller's agent should be explaining these types of logistics and what to be wary of when reviewing competing offers so the seller knows exactly what they're being offered. As a final note, even within these different inspection options, there are some additional tweaks available as well to make an offer more aggressive. As an example, once a buyer's decided which type of inspection to request, they'll also need to indicate how long they need to complete the inspections and make a decision or request for repairs. The shorter this window is, the better for the seller, as the house will be off the market and not available for other buyers during this period. So a seller would be much more comfortable with a couple of days for home inspections as opposed to a couple of weeks. Be sure not to make the inspection window too short though. If one of the inspections you want to complete takes additional time for lab results, you want to make sure you have time to get those lab results back. For instance, radon and mold tests typically take at least 2 days for the inspector to collect the appropriate samples and receive results back from the lab. That wraps up episode number 1 of our Good, Better, Best series on offer terms for DC and Maryland. In our next video, we'll be discussing appraisals and the various ways buyers can approach them to make their offer more competitive.